Alrighty then. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Matthew Baker of Beautiful New York Tours. Nowadays, we do pretty much everything on the internet, including this tour. But once upon a time, New York City was the capital of print journalism. On a certain level, it still is, but of course print journalism has changed so much, one almost wonders if the phrase has meaning anymore. The New York Times is, of course, the paper of record, all the news that's fit to print, as they say on their front page. But it is certainly not the only significant, journalistic outlet in New York, nor was it ever the only one. Now, granted, it gives its name to one of our most famous neighborhoods, Times Square. It was in 1904 when the New York Times left Newspaper Row down by City Hall up to what was in those days the edge of the city. The area had been called Longacre Square and was renamed Times Square. The Times celebrated their big move to Midtown with a fireworks display on New Year's Eve 1904. That is what began the tradition of Times Square being the place to be on New Year's Eve. Although, of course, there were some who would say Times Square is one place you definitely don't want to be on New Year's Eve. That is a matter of personal taste. I have never done New Year's Eve in Times Square. You could not pay me to do New Year's Eve in Times Square. I know this because people have tried. I have been offered tour jobs that include doing New Year's Eve in Times Square. I have turned those gigs down. It is not my idea of a good time. You are out there suffering in the freezing cold for about 10 hours for 10 seconds worth of fun. There's a highly inappropriate joke there somewhere, but I can't quite place it. Anyway, there's also papers that have certainly both come and gone. The New York Post, the New York Daily News are still around. But what about papers like the Herald, after which Herald Square is named? James Gordon Bennett's paper. Or the Tribune, Horace Greeley's paper. Greeley Square is just south of Herald Square, and the Tribune and the Herald were rivals to each other until they eventually merged and became the International Herald Tribune. There were also important papers like The World, which was published by Joseph Pulitzer, against whom the famous Newsies strike took place in 1899, and The Journal was published by William Randolph Hearst round about the same time. So you have many, many great papers, and even in these days of the internet, these papers and their descendants continue to matter because they are how you discover things. You get everything from baseball stats to movie times to important political headlines to social diary entries to what is happening in the metro section in these periodicals. Now, of course, newspapers are not the only important thing published in New York City. There are also the great magazines. Certain national magazines like Vogue and Newsweek, are published in New York, but you also have city-centric magazines like the legendary The New Yorker. The New Yorker, probably most famous for its logo and for its cartoons, but a great magazine for opinions and perspectives, for discussions of what is happening in the city, and it's one of the few mainstream magazines that still publishes poetry, which makes it very close to my heart as well. On your way into the city, definitely take the trouble to pick up a paper or a magazine. If you don't mind lugging around an actual print edition, there is something wonderfully classic about doing so. Otherwise, an online version will still provide you the info you need, but it tends to be a very good step in terms of getting acclimated to the city, and I highly recommend it. Now, usually I end these videos with the phrase, when it is safe to do so. Happily, reading magazines and newspapers, especially if you do it online, is one of the things that is still safe. So go check out your New York City newspapers and magazines. They are very, very worth it. And when, based on the strength of what you've read in those periodicals, you are ready to travel to New York, Please check me out at Beautiful New York Tours. You can search Beautiful New York Tours on Facebook or email me at baker.tours@yahoo.com. Again, that is baker.tours@yahoo. Thank you very much.